Library Leadership Podcast is brought to you by Innovative. Focused on accelerating libraries' impact on the world, Innovative helps spark connections between libraries and their communities. With a comprehensive portfolio of solutions for libraries worldwide, Innovative technology makes resources accessible to patrons near and far. Learn more at www.iii.com/podcast.
This is Adrienne Herrera-Juarez. You're listening to Library Leadership Podcast, where we talk about libraries and leadership and speak with guests who share their ideas, innovations, and strategic insights in the profession. During times of rapid and unexpected change, as we are all dealing with now, it can be helpful to get information from an expert to help guide our paths. So I reached out to Tony Gardner. Tony is on the faculty at the University of Virginia, serving as the director of the Leadership Development Program of the Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service. He works both in the public and private sectors to improve organizational performance and manage large-scale organizational change. I was fortunate a number of years ago to attend the Leadership Development Program at the University of Virginia and learned a great deal from Tony, who generously on this podcast episode shares his expertise about leadership in times of change. Enjoy the show. Tony, welcome to the show. Thank you for talking with me today about leadership in times of change. With so much going on in our world and communities, we need to be tuned into how we can help our organizations navigate through all of this. Can you talk about why this is and what's going on to make us pay more attention than ever to this aspect of leadership?
Hi, Adrienne. First, thanks very much for inviting me to join you today. It's a pleasure to be here. Turning to your question, it's no secret that the world is topsy-turvy these days. Many people in different organizations are confronted by the unimaginable, really, having to adjust at home, at work, facing many scary possibilities. People are emotionally on edge and uncertain about the future. These double-barreled situations with the pandemic and the heightened concerns for racial justice and equity have complicated our lives. Surely the pandemic has caught nearly everybody off guard and unprepared. And because the consequences can be very personal and risky, it's disrupted how we think about the businesses we're in and what we do. It's also apparent that virtually every organization faces significant issues related to race and other aspects of equity. And people are becoming more rightfully vocal about it, and organizations are unprepared to deal with it well. And that issue is complicated incredibly by the ways we have to deal with the virus. So organizations are then filled with people who want to know how we're going to get through this, when will it end, what will it mean. The job of leaders, especially in times like this, is to help people have hope, to see a path to the future, and to feel supported in getting there. This means that leaders must be focused on sensing or understanding what's happening, providing and communicating their support, and as you allude, creating the navigational aids for people to get through these stormy seas. On top of all this, leaders have to be thinking about how are we going to have to change as a result of what we've been experiencing. And yet at the same time, they also have to be dealing with the huge number of ways organizations have to change in the here and now to cope on what's going on today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those insights. On this show, we've talked about the difference between leadership and management. What does that mean when we talk about leadership and management in times of change?
You know, we think of leadership and management as two different kinds of work. They're the same people usually do both things, but they don't do it simultaneously. Leadership is future focused. about defining the desired future and developing strategies for getting there. And leaders focus on doing the right things, trying to discern the right things and have us pointed in those directions. Managers focus on doing those things right. So management work concentrates on getting things done efficiently and effectively. Everyone in the organization should have a responsibility to be thinking about what's best for the future, not just the people at the top. Although those in the hierarchy frequently should spend more of their time doing leadership work. And that leadership work is best done through extensive collaboration among trusted team members, people who get together to think about things. So directly addressing your question, the fact of the matter is that much more work in times of crises is done in the management arena than the leadership one. And that's because people are responding to the rapid requirements that are emerging, fast-paced changes in what needs to be done now. So as a result, what we are trying to accomplish right now is pretty clear. This turns up, we got to deal with it. So turning to management in times of change or in times of urgency is what people generally do. As a result, it's the leadership work that's neglected. It's murky. It's about trying to discern the future. Yet at the same time, it's often when opportunities to make lasting changes are most readily available and doable, but we don't turn to it.
Interesting. So leadership is imperative when there are opportunities for change. For our listeners, will you share the ins and outs of that?
Well, it's natural in some ways that some find this differentiation between leadership and management confusing. There are so many ways that people have talked about those two terms over decades and even centuries. So what might help is to take a few examples of what the difference is between the two. So let's talk about one city. It's not a library example, but I think people can understand what I intend by talking about it. The city, after the beginning of the restrictions due to COVID, closed down its city hall. They had already made every payment transaction for customers to be done electronically, except for paying utilities. You're paying for your utility bills. So after the restrictions were put in place, then near the date for a final payment, like a quarterly payment or a monthly payment deadline, people actually showed up outside the city hall to pay their bills in the way they always had in the past. But they found that City Hall had closed down. They hadn't gotten the word. Now, this was a management priority, the problem of high priority, I guess you'd call it, because there they are standing outside the City Hall, doors are locked. So the people who were working in a few parts of the building figured out a way to deal with the people on the line so they could make a payment. They created a short-term fix that was convoluted. It worked as an emergency kind of thing. It was a managerial fix. It could have worked for the future, but it was certainly not advisable. So what then happened was, instead of letting it sit that way, people in the city decided to step back from the short-term fix, and they put on their leadership thinking hats. They said, how should we deal with this over the long term? So teams decided to switch to electronic-only payment for the utility bills for the future and to make that a permanent way of doing it. Then they said, look at this building. If you go downstairs where it is, there's this long set of counters. that if we in fact take away the need for them because people are going to pay electronically, what are we going to do with that space? And so they created some teams to think about that virtually in the midst of the closure, and they decided to move the recreation department into that space. And they also decided to create other community programs. They could actually begin some reconfiguration of the space during the pandemic. Now that's stepping back and saying, here's an incident, let's think about what it means for the future. That's leadership work. It's focused on the future. So you had the contrast between managerially handling it now and then thinking through for the long term, what's the thing that we should be doing?
Wow.
It's really an interesting example. But it's less useful for senior leaders to believe that they have to come up with all the ideas for the future. So this group, for instance, had lots of people thinking about, well, how should we do this? What should we be doing for the long term? So you can look around and find that that's happening in organizations across the country. People who are working in portions of an organization, doing specific programs, they're coming up with new ways to work around the problems coming with the pandemic, to change the way the systems they use and the processes they use. And they're being innovative in times of the crisis. And the bosses, they're not thinking about it. They don't even know sometimes what's happening. They're relying on people to do the leadership work that's appropriate, that the management work is getting done in fixing the problem. And lots of people are thinking through now, well, what does this mean for us in the future? So one of a leader's jobs is not only to be thinking about the future, but it's also about how to excite others, how to motivate them, how to help them understand why we should be changing and they should be changing over the long term, and urging them to try new things out, to build their skills, and to develop their capacity as the organization goes through inevitable transformation. If we don't do this after the pandemic, you know what's going to happen. The homeostatic tendencies of people will push them to return to these things were in the past and how they did things in the past. If you want a different outcome than that, leadership's necessary to build a new normal, that future kind of place we want to be, that frequently people talk about, this new normal. We've got to create it. It just won't happen by itself.
And I know that we might just want to keep some of these innovations post-COVID. We didn't know we needed them, but here we are, and we're creating new ways of doing things. And if you think about it in a certain way, kind of an exciting time to rethink what we've been doing. And you talk about in some of your work that an effective, trusting leadership team can play into this kind of work. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. As a matter of fact, when we're talking to teams, one of the things that their job is to evaluate those things which are going on now and say which ones of them, I guess is a better way of saying it, are ones that we should build on and move into the future, and which ones of them we did temporarily, but they don't necessarily speak to the future for us. So it's this discernment, this evaluation of the things that are going on now and trying to figure out where do we invest for the future and where do we say, well, we did that then, but we don't need to do it now. So when teams are working together, they have to be real candid in doing this evaluation. So scientific evidence is pretty clear that teams almost always outperform individuals. Some people don't like to hear that, particularly some people in charge in some places. But rarely is the boss the one who knows everything. But rather, teams provide perspective that make it so that the team can outperform the individual. And this is particularly the case when trying to do leadership work. However, science also says that people are very defensive about their ideas and how they see the world. This is how I think it works. This is how I believe it should be. So in order to mesh these two concepts about the benefits of teamwork, creating diverse opinions that help bring a better solution, and the idea that people are very defensive about their own thoughts, teams have to create and reach a certain level of trust so that members can confront the ideas of individuals in a way that reduces members' defensiveness and opens people up to understand different points of view, to see different ideas and understand experiences that others have, help us reformulate the concepts that we have held to ourselves as dear, and be open to see alternatives that will work better than just the idea I had. And that means that building trust becomes a very important factor in effective teams. Pat Lencioni has written extensively about why that's important and how to do just that, how to create this trust level on a team. And we do a lot of work with teams to make sure that they have the benefit of thinking through how to build that trust and practicing it. Yeah, I suspect that you probably have Pat's books in your library.
Absolutely. And I know people are going to be looking for them now based on this conversation, which is great. Are there practical ideas for teams that we can examine during times of change?
Sure, there are lots of places to look. I guess technology is the most obvious. We already understand, like we never did before, the impact of Zoom and the other platforms, where people can work from home, they can meet at a distance. It's kind of revolutionized how work can go in some respects. Thinking about how people will change when the pandemic opens everything up again, how facilities should be reshaped, how we can take advantage of the technology and not lose the ability to be more in the same room and have more contact with people, how that will work. That's leadership work. And if we don't think about it now, when all of a sudden we open up, we're going to be inundated in trying to make things happen that we'll be not thinking through the ways that we could plan for that to happen well. We also could be examining the policies that were put into effect. Some of them cut red tape because we needed to expedite things in the crisis. Some were the processes we use to do things. Some places said, all right, well, now we can do virtual inspections. We don't have to go out and actually see that you nailed the nail straight or that the thing was put in exactly right. We can take a picture of it. So how are we going to streamline the way we do things in the future built upon the experiences that we've had now? Most of which have probably worked fairly well, some of which have bombed. And if they're bombed, how do we put those aside while we focus on the ones that offer us opportunity into the future? And thinking about, lots of organizations have changed their human resources policies, allowing work from home, where before they prohibited it. And many people have found advantages to working at home. So evaluating each organization, what its view is about how those policies and other things like that would pay off for the future is a really important step. And if you wait till this is all over to start thinking about that, you're just going to have a ton of stuff to do all at once.
We should definitely start thinking about that now.
Yeah. Researching and recognizing how artificial intelligence is going to help us serve customers and make decisions. There's a lot of research and lots of data on how jobs will be reshaped and reformed based on artificial intelligence and technology. So if that's the case, we should be thinking about what we're seeing of it now. And during this period, which for some people is more downtime, how can we help them prepare for the future? How could we help them to study for how you could do things technologically differently? What kind of skills could they gain so that when jobs are changed or some of them disappear, people are better qualified to shift into other fields down the road? That work can be done now. And then shifting ways of engaging people rather than just requiring people to come physically to meetings. City councils, which always said, well, you can watch on television, but you can't participate in our meetings, are re-examining whether maybe there is a way that in the future we could have people participate in meetings electronically. So thinking through that stuff. And I remember having been introduced to audiobooks on tape in Arlington's libraries 30 years ago. And now I have over 1,000 titles in my audible.com account. And so that shift of how I was introduced to audiobooks then and how I now have these thousands of choices right on my phone, that tells me that a lot of the things we're looking at now have a future for how they will affect how we deal with our customers and also how we can engage people in how we operate.
Do you have a favorite management or leadership book, and why?
I have right behind me many books on my bookshelf, including, of course, some I have not read yet, many that I've read partially and some that I've devoured. But one of them I think of as a sleeper. Not that it puts you to sleep, but it's a kind of a sleeper book because not many people know about it. It's not a highly popular book. It is on Amazon, and it's called Leadership and the Art of Conversation by Kim Crisco with a K. I think of it as a remarkable book. 15 years ago, I bought 100 copies. I think I exhausted the supplier at that point. I bought everything he had to give to friends and clients. At that time, it was a book that was published out of India. It now is available on Amazon with a different publisher. So it wasn't very popular, but it's about how one uses conversations to create the future. It recognizes that helping people seeing their future is a leadership responsibility, but it's only half the job. The other half is helping people let go of the past and helping them make a shift from where they've been to where they need to or want to be. So shifting conversations to speak more of what could or should be helps people to break the habit of almost always talking about what they did or how things happened. If you examine conversations, the data shows 80% or so of the conversations are about what happened in the past, what's going on right now. And very little of the conversation is about what could be happening or what should be happening. So this opens up significant opportunities for people, and it really drives positive change in an organization. And I really like the book.
Sounds timely. Thank you. Tony, in closing, what do libraries mean to you personally?
I have a soft spot in my heart for libraries. From the time, I guess, in high school where I had a job rebinding and repairing books at the library. Putting on new covers, repairing the books that had been ripped apart, and getting them back on the shelves. It was quiet work, and I did it in the back part of the library, but I really liked it. I felt useful, and I thought libraries were important. So my kids, my grandkids have all been voracious users of libraries. And even now, people are transforming those libraries not only to be repositories of books and computer access points, but as you spoke about a little bit earlier, they're also learning centers, and community resources, and meeting centers where people can come together. And some cities are reimagining their libraries as the living room for the community, providing them both with the things that people have been great at doing at libraries in the past, but adding more varied services for their new patrons as people come to the library for different purposes. I think libraries are invaluable in the community.
Tony, you're a wonderful advocate for libraries, and I didn't know about your hands-on experience with them, so I'm glad you shared that story. That's just marvelous. Thank you. And Tony, I just wanted to tell you, thank you so much for letting me turn to you in this time of high change. We're all going through a lot right now. Being able to have an expert on the show like you means so much as we work through this together. So I really appreciate you being here with me today.
Well, thank you very much. It's been delightful to talk with you.
You've been listening to Library Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Adrienne Herrick-Juarez. Our producer is Nate Vineyard. More episodes can be found at libraryleadershippodcast.com, where you can now subscribe to have new shows delivered right into your email inbox. You can also find the show on Apple iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. We would like to thank the Park City Library for their dedicated support of this show. The opinions expressed on this show are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the views of Library Leadership Podcast or our sponsors.